Marcus, since you think you're so smart, why don't you come up here and solve this? Mr. Henderson's voice dripped with sarcasm as he scrawled an impossibly complex equation across the whiteboard, symbols and Greek letters that made the other students gasp. Marcus Williams, just 11 years old, stood frozen at his desk. His classmates whispered, some giggled nervously. The equation before him wasn't just advanced calculus, it was a doctoral-level differential equation that even graduate students would struggle with. What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Mr. Henderson smirked, crossing his arms. This is what happens when you challenge your teacher's authority in my classroom. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he approached the board. His heart pounded, but not from fear. What Mr. Henderson didn't know, what nobody in that classroom knew, would change everything in the next 60 seconds. What Marcus did next didn't just shock the entire school. It triggered a chain of events that would end Mr. Henderson's career forever. Dear viewer, I humbly request you to watch or listen till the end and rate this story out of 10. Your rating will help me to give you better stories in next videos. If you are watching my story for the first time, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. Marcus Williams had always been different, though most people at Jefferson Middle School never bothered to notice. At 11 years old, he was smaller than most of his classmates, with close-cropped hair and thick-rimmed glasses that constantly slid down his nose. While other kids spent their lunch breaks playing basketball or scrolling through their phones, Marcus could usually be found in the corner of the library, surrounded by books that seemed far too advanced for someone his age. Mr. Richard Henderson had been teaching mathematics at Jefferson Middle School for 23 years. At 48, he'd grown comfortable in his position, perhaps too comfortable. His teaching style hadn't evolved much since the 1990s, and he ran his classroom with an iron fist that bordered on tyrannical. Students feared him more than they respected him, and that was exactly how he liked it. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Marcus entered the classroom 5 minutes early, as he always did, and took his seat in the third row. He placed his worn backpack beside his desk and pulled out his notebook, not the standard ruled notebook most students used, but a leather-bound journal filled with equations, theorems, and mathematical proofs that he worked on during his free time. All right, settle down, Mr. Henderson barked as the bell rang. He turned to the whiteboard and began writing out the day's lesson on quadratic equations. Today we'll be covering basic factoring methods. I expect everyone to pay attention because this will be on the test. As Mr. Henderson droned on about methods that Marcus had mastered years ago, the boy found his mind wandering. He began sketching out a particularly interesting problem he'd encountered in one of his father's old textbooks, a problem involving nonlinear dynamics that had been puzzling him for days. Marcus Williams. Mr. Henderson's sharp voice cut through the classroom like a knife. Since you seem more interested in your doodling than my lesson, perhaps you'd like to share with the class what's so fascinating. Marcus looked up, startled. I was just ignoring your teacher, that's what you were doing. Mr. Henderson strode down the aisle, his footsteps heavy with authority. Let me see that notebook. Marcus hesitated, his hand instinctively covering his work. That journal was private, filled with years of mathematical explorations that meant everything to him. But he knew better than to directly refuse a teacher's request, especially Mr. Henderson. Reluctantly, Marcus handed over the journal. Mr. Henderson snatched it from his hands and flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from irritation to confusion to something darker, mockery. Well. What do we have here? He held up the journal for the class to see, though the complex equations were meaningless to most of the students. Looks like Marcus thinks he's some kind of mathematician. Tell me, Marcus, where did you copy all this from? Some website? Your older brother's homework? I didn't copy it, sir. Those are your own work. Mr. Henderson laughed, a cold sound that made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. You expect me to believe that an 11-year-old child is working on? He squinted at the page, differential equations. Do you even know what that means? Marcus's jaw tightened. Yes, sir. It's an equation that relates a function with its derivatives. The one I was working on involves. Enough. Mr. Henderson slammed the journal shut. I've had enough of your arrogance, Marcus. You come into my class, ignore my lessons, and pretend to be working on college-level mathematics. Do you think you're better than everyone else here? Better than me? The classroom had gone completely silent. Even the students who usually whispered during class were watching with wide eyes. Sarah Chen, who sat next to Marcus, looked concerned. She knew Marcus was smart, really smart, but even she didn't understand the full extent of his abilities. Marcus chose his words carefully. No, sir. I like mathematics. My dad used to. I don't care what your father used to do. Mr. Henderson's voice had taken on a cruel edge now. What I care about is respect. Respect for your teacher, respect for this classroom, and respect for the curriculum that I've spent 2 decades perfecting. He walked back to the front of the classroom, still holding Marcus's journal. You know what? I think young Marcus here needs to be taught a lesson about humility. About knowing your place. Mr. Henderson turned to the whiteboard and began writing. But he wasn't writing another basic quadratic equation. Instead, he was writing something far more complex, a differential equation that he'd encountered once during his own graduate studies decades ago. He'd never been able to solve it himself, had to look up the solution in a textbook. But a child like Marcus wouldn't know that. The equation sprawled across the board, full of Greek symbols, partial derivatives, and boundary conditions that would make even advanced calculus students pale. Theta, lambda, second-order derivatives, it was a monster of a problem, typically reserved for doctoral candidates in applied mathematics. When he finished, Mr. Henderson stepped back and gestured grandly at the board. There you go, Marcus. Since you're such a mathematical genius, why don't you come up here and solve this equation for us? Show the class just how smart you really are. The mockery in his voice was unmistakable. Several students laughed nervously, unsure if they should join in or feel sorry for Marcus. This was clearly meant as punishment, as public humiliation designed to put an uppity student back in his place. Marcus sat frozen in his seat, staring at the equation on the board. His mind was already racing, already breaking down the components, seeing patterns and relationships that others wouldn't notice. What's the matter, Marcus? Mr. Henderson taunted. Suddenly not so confident. Maybe you realize that real mathematics is a bit different from whatever you've been scribbling in that journal of yours. The other students were watching Marcus now, some with pity, others with the kind of cruel curiosity that comes from seeing someone else being picked on. Nobody expected him to be able to solve it. Nobody expected him to even understand it. Mr. Henderson crossed his arms over his chest, a satisfied smirk on his face. He'd made his point. The boy would sit there embarrassed, and hopefully, he'd learn to stay in his lane, to stop pretending to be something he wasn't. But then Marcus stood up. His legs felt shaky, and his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. But he stood up anyway. I'll try, sir, Marcus said quietly. The smirk on Mr. Henderson's face widened. Oh, please do. I can't wait to see this. Marcus walked to the front of the classroom on unsteady legs, every eye in the room following his movement. The equation on the board seemed to pulse before his eyes, not with intimidation, but with possibility. He'd seen similar problems before, not in school, never in school, but in the late nights he spent in his father's study, working through problems that most people wouldn't encounter until graduate school. Take your time, Mr. Henderson said, his voice dripping with false encouragement. He settled into his chair behind his desk, leaning back with the satisfied expression of someone who'd already won. We have all period. Though I suspect you'll give up in about 30 seconds once you realize you're in over your head. Marcus picked up the chalk with trembling fingers. His mind was already working, already breaking down the equation into manageable pieces. It was a second-order partial differential equation with non-homogeneous boundary conditions, difficult, yes, but not impossible. Not if you understood the underlying principles. Before we begin, Mr. Henderson announced to the class, let me explain what Marcus is supposedly about to attempt. This is a doctoral-level equation, the kind of problem that PhD candidates in mathematics spend weeks solving. It involves partial differential equations, advanced calculus, and boundary value problems. In other words, it's completely beyond the scope of middle school mathematics. He paused for effect, letting his words sink in. Several students giggled. Jason Martinez, one of the class clowns, whispered something to his neighbor that made them both laugh. Marcus heard the words, trying to be white, and felt his stomach clench, but he pushed the feeling away. He'd heard worse before. Now, Marcus, Mr. Henderson continued, I want you to show your work. Explain every step. That way, when you inevitably get stuck, we'll all know exactly where your understanding breaks down. Marcus nodded slowly. His hand moved to the board, and he began to write. First, he identified the type of equation, a second-order PDE with Dirichlet boundary conditions. His handwriting was small but precise, each symbol placed with careful attention. I'll start by checking if the equation is separable, Marcus said softly. His voice barely carried across the classroom, but everyone was listening now, the initial laughter dying away as they watched him work. He began separating variables, writing x, and t functions, showing how the original equation could be broken down into two ordinary differential equations. Mr. Henderson's smirk began to falter slightly. The boy was using correct terminology, following a logical approach. Must be something he memorized, Mr. Henderson muttered, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. Anyone can repeat steps they've seen before. But Marcus wasn't just repeating steps. He was solving the problem in real time, his mind working through each transformation with a clarity that came from genuine understanding. He applied the boundary conditions, determined the eigenvalues, and began constructing the general solution using Fourier series. The chalk scratched against the board, filling the silence with a rhythm that almost sounded like music. Numbers and symbols flowed from Marcus's hand with increasing confidence. He was in his element now, the fear and nervousness melting away as the pure logic of mathematics took over. Sarah Chen leaned forward in her seat, her eyes wide. She was one of the top students in the class, but even she could only partially follow what Marcus was doing. The complexity of the mathematics was stunning. Mr. Henderson stood up from his desk, his face no longer showing amusement. He walked closer to the board, studying Marcus's work with growing disbelief. The boy wasn't just scribbling random equations, he was actually solving the problem. Every step was correct, every transformation valid. Where did you learn this? Mr. Henderson demanded, his voice sharp. Who taught you this? Marcus paused, chalk hovering over the board. My father, sir. He used to be. I don't believe you, Mr. Henderson interrupted. There's no way you could understand this on your own. You must have seen this specific problem before. You're cheating somehow. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Marcus turned to face his teacher, and for the first time that morning, there was something other than nervousness in his eyes. There was hurt, yes, but also a quiet determination. I'm not cheating, sir. I can explain every step if you'd like. The equation is challenging, but the principles are consistent with. Stop talking and finish the problem, Mr. Henderson snapped. If you're so smart, finish it. Marcus turned back to the board. He was nearly done now, just needed to apply the final conditions and simplify. His hand moved faster, more confidently. He determined the coefficients using orthogonality properties of the eigenfunctions, integrated over the domain, and began writing out the final solution. The classroom was completely silent now. Even the students who'd been whispering earlier were watching with rapt attention. There was something electric in the air, a sense that they were witnessing something extraordinary, even if most of them couldn't fully comprehend what they were seeing. Marcus wrote the final line of the solution and stepped back from the board. His hands were covered in chalk dust, and his shirt had a white smudge where he'd accidentally brushed against the board, but his eyes were clear and confident. "That's the general solution," he said quietly. "For any specific case, you'd need to know the initial conditions to determine the exact coefficients, but this is the complete analytical solution to the equation." Mr. Henderson stared at the board, his face cycling through emotions, disbelief, confusion, anger, and finally, something that looked like fear. He grabbed a textbook from his desk, one of his old graduate school texts that he kept for reference. His hands shook slightly as he flipped through the pages, searching. The second stretched into a minute. Students began shifting in their seats, unsure what to make of the tension. Marcus stood by the board, waiting, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, Mr. Henderson found what he was looking for. He compared the solution in the book to what Marcus had written on the board. His face went pale. It was correct. Not just partially correct or approximately correct. It was completely, perfectly correct. "This is impossible," Mr. Henderson whispered, but loud enough for the front row to hear. You couldn't have." "Is the solution correct, sir?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the trembling in his legs. Mr. Henderson looked at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time, really seeing him. But instead of acknowledgement or apology, what crossed his face was something darker. This child, this black child he'd meant to humiliate, had just demonstrated a level of mathematical ability that exceeded his own. And he'd done it in front of the entire class. "Sit down," Mr. Henderson said coldly. "But sir, my journal," I said. "Sit down." Mr. Henderson's shout made several students jump. He snatched Marcus's journal from his desk and held it away from the boy. "You can get this back at the end of the day. Now return to your seat." Marcus hesitated, looking at his journal, years of work, thoughts, problems, and solutions. But Mr. Henderson's face was thunderous, and Marcus knew better than to push. He walked back to his desk in silence, feeling dozens of eyes on him. As Marcus sat down, Mr. Henderson turned to the board and began erasing the equation and Marcus's solution with aggressive strokes. Within seconds, all evidence of what had just happened was gone, wiped away as if it had never existed. The rest of the class period passed in uncomfortable silence. Mr. Henderson taught the planned lesson on basic factoring with mechanical precision, but his heart wasn't in it. His hands shook slightly as he wrote on the board, and twice he made simple arithmetic errors that he usually would never make. Students who would normally doze off or pass notes sat rigidly in their seats, unsure of what they'd witnessed or what it meant. Marcus tried to focus on the lesson, but his mind kept returning to his journal sitting on Mr. Henderson's desk. That journal contained more than just mathematics, it held memories of his father, Dr. James Williams, who had died from cancer 2 years ago. Every equation, every proof, every problem in those pages was part of an ongoing conversation between Marcus and the father he'd lost. It was the one place where he still felt connected to the man who taught him to see the beauty in numbers, the poetry in mathematical truth. When the bell finally rang, students grabbed their bags and hurried out as if escaping a crime scene. Marcus approached Mr. Henderson's desk hesitantly. "Sir, my journal." Mr. Henderson didn't look up from the papers he was shuffling. "Come back after school. I need to verify some things first." "Verify what, sir?" Now Mr. Henderson did look up, and his expression was hard. "I need to confirm you didn't plagiarize all that work. That you didn't just copy it from somewhere. Until I can verify the authenticity, I'm keeping it." "But sir, that's my personal, after school, Marcus. Now leave." Marcus left the classroom with a hollow feeling in his chest. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Word had spread about what happened in Mr. Henderson's class, the story growing more exaggerated with each retelling. By lunch, some students were saying Marcus had solved an equation that Einstein couldn't solve. Others claimed Mr. Henderson had actually cried. Still others insisted Marcus must have cheated somehow, that there was no way a kid their age could do what people were saying he'd done. In the cafeteria, Sarah Chen found Marcus sitting alone at his usual table, picking at his sandwich without eating it. "That was incredible," she said, sitting down across from him. "I had no idea you could do that kind of math." Marcus shrugged. "My dad taught me. He was a professor of applied mathematics at the university before he got sick." "Was?" Sarah's voice softened. "He died 2 years ago. Cancer." Marcus said it matter-of-factly, but Sarah could see the pain behind his eyes. "We used to work on problems together every night. It was our thing. After he died, I kept going. It made me feel closer to him, you know." Sarah nodded, not quite knowing what to say. "That journal Mr. Henderson took, is it important?" "It's the most important thing I have. It has all my work from the past 2 years. All the problems Dad and I started together and I finished. All the new ones I've been working on. If anything happened to it." Marcus's voice trailed off. "He can't keep it," Sarah said firmly. "That's your personal property. If he doesn't give it back, tell your mom. Tell the principal." But Marcus shook his head. "Mom works 2 jobs since Dad died. She's barely home. And Principal Morrison, he's not going to go against a teacher who's been here for 20 years because a student is complaining." "Then what are you going to do?" Marcus looked down at his uneaten sandwich. "I don't know." The afternoon classes were torture. Marcus couldn't concentrate, couldn't focus. He kept thinking about his journal, about what Mr. Henderson might do with it. Would he really verify the work, or was that just an excuse? What if he threw it away? What if he claimed Marcus stole it from somewhere? When the final bell rang, Marcus made his way back to Mr. Henderson's classroom. The door was partially open, and he could hear voices inside. He stopped, instinct telling him to listen before entering. "Can't possibly believe a child did this." It was Mr. Henderson's voice, speaking to someone. "I've been teaching for 23 years. I know what middle school students are capable of, and this is beyond that." The solution was correct, though. A woman's voice, Mrs. Patterson, another math teacher. "That's not the point. The point is there's no way he did this on his own. He must have had help, must have copied it from somewhere." "Did you ask him about it?" Mrs. Patterson sounded skeptical. "Maybe he really is gifted. It happens sometimes." "Gifted?" Mr. Henderson laughed bitterly. "Margaret, let's be honest about what's happening here. That boy comes from one of the poorest neighborhoods in the district. His mother works 2 jobs just to keep them afloat. He shows up to school in the same 3 outfits rotated throughout the week. And you want me to believe he's some kind of mathematical prodigy?" There was a pause. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, his heart sinking. "Richard, that's not fair." "It's perfectly fair. I've seen kids like him before. They find some smart friend or older sibling to do their work, then take credit for it. I won't enable that kind of deception." "So what are you going to do?" "I'm going to document everything. Tomorrow, I'm reporting him to Principal Morrison for academic dishonesty. If he wants to claim that journal is his work, he'll need to prove it, under supervision, without any outside help." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. He wanted to burst into the room, to demand his journal back, to defend himself. But something stopped him, a cold understanding that it wouldn't matter what he said. Mr. Henderson had already made up his mind. Instead, Marcus quietly walked away. He left the building without his journal, without confronting his teacher, with nothing but a growing sense of injustice burning in his chest. That night, Marcus's mother, Angela Williams, came home from her second shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide. She found Marcus sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. "Baby, what's wrong?" she asked, immediately concerned. Angela had a sixth sense for when her son was troubled. Marcus told her everything, the equation, the solution, Mr. Henderson's accusations, the journal he wouldn't return. Angela listened with growing anger, her jaw tightening with each detail. "That's your property," she said when he finished. "He has no right to keep it. He says he needs to verify I didn't plagiarize it." "Plagiarize your own journal?" Angela shook her head in disbelief. "Marcus, your father would be so angry right now. That journal. I know what it means to you. What it meant to both of you." Marcus felt tears threatening and blinked them back hard. "What should I do?" Angela was quiet for a moment, thinking. She was exhausted from working 2 jobs, from trying to keep their small family afloat after James's death. But this was her son, her brilliant, sensitive son who'd inherited his father's genius and was being punished for it. "I'm calling the school tomorrow," she said firmly. "And if they don't resolve this, we're going higher. No teacher gets to steal from my son and accuse him of cheating just because they can't accept how smart he is." Principal Morrison's office smelled like old coffee and lemon-scented cleaning products. Angela Williams sat in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs across from his desk, her work scrub still on from her morning shift. She'd had to use personal time for this meeting, time she couldn't really afford to take, but this was about her son. Principal Morrison was a heavy-set man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair and a perpetually tired expression. He'd been principal of Jefferson Middle School for 12 years, and in that time, he'd mastered the art of avoiding conflict when possible. "Mrs. Williams, I appreciate you coming in," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I understand there's been some confusion regarding Marcus and Mr. Henderson." "There's no confusion," Angela said sharply. "Mr. Henderson took my son's personal journal and is refusing to return it. He's also planning to file academic dishonesty charges, which is absurd." Morrison shifted in his chair uncomfortably. "I've spoken with Richard, Mr. Henderson, about the incident. He's expressed concerns about the complexity of the work in Marcus's journal. He believes it may have been copied from another source." "Copied from where, exactly?" "Marcus has been working in that journal for 2 years. It contains his personal notes, his mathematical explorations. His father was Dr. James Williams, a professor of applied mathematics at State University. He taught Marcus before he passed away." Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "I wasn't aware of that." "Why would you be?" "It's not in Marcus's file because my son doesn't flaunt his abilities. He doesn't cause trouble. He comes to school, does his work, and tries not to stand out." Angela's voice cracked slightly with emotion. "And when he shows what he can really do, he gets accused of cheating." Morrison pulled out a file folder. According to Mr. Henderson's account, Marcus was working on problems during class time instead of paying attention to the lesson. When confronted, he became defiant. "Defiant?" Angela's voice rose. "My son is many things, but defiant isn't one of them. What really happened is that Mr. Henderson tried to humiliate him by putting an impossible equation on the board. And when Marcus solved it, correctly, Mr. Henderson couldn't handle being wrong." There was a long silence. Morrison tapped his pen against the desk, clearly weighing his options. On one hand, he had a veteran teacher with over 2 decades of service. On the other, a single mother making serious accusations about that teacher's judgment and motivation. "Mrs. Williams," he said finally, "I'm sure we can resolve this reasonably. However, to address Mr. Henderson's concerns about the authenticity of Marcus's work, I think it would be beneficial for Marcus to complete an assessment." "What kind of assessment?" "A mathematics evaluation, supervised by an impartial third party. If Marcus can demonstrate the abilities you're describing, then there would be no question about the journal's authenticity, and it would be returned immediately." Angela considered this. It felt like giving in to injustice, like making her son prove himself when he'd already done nothing wrong. But she also knew that sometimes you had to pick your battles, especially when fighting against an established system. "Fine," she said. "But I want this done quickly, and I want it done fairly. And I want to know what happens to Mr. Henderson if, When, Marcus proves he can do everything in that journal. Morrison's expression became even more uncomfortable. Let's focus on resolving the immediate issue first. That afternoon, arrangements were made. Dr. Patricia Chen, the head of the mathematics department at State University, agreed to conduct the assessment. She'd known James Williams professionally and was curious about his son's alleged abilities. The test would take place that Friday, giving everyone 3 days to prepare. When Marcus learned about the arrangement, he felt a mixture of relief and resentment. Relief that he might get his journal back, but resentment that he had to prove himself at all. The next 2 days at school were awkward. Mr. Henderson largely ignored Marcus in class, calling on other students and avoiding eye contact. The other students treated Marcus differently too, some with newfound respect, others with suspicion, a few with outright hostility. During lunch on Thursday, Jason Martinez approached Marcus's table with 2 friends flanking him. "So you think you're some kind of genius now?" Jason said, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "Think you're better than everyone else?" Marcus looked up from his food. "I never said that." "Nah, you didn't have to say it. You showed it when you made Mr. Henderson look stupid in front of the whole class." Jason leaned closer. "You know what we call people like you? Sellouts. Uncle Toms. Trying to be white." Sarah Chen, sitting nearby, stood up. "Leave him alone, Jason." "Nobody asked you," Jason snapped at her before turning back to Marcus. "You could have just shut up and taken the joke. Instead, you had to go and make it a big deal. Now Henderson's all pissed off, taking it out on everyone. Thanks for that." Marcus's hands clenched under the table. "Mr. Henderson put that equation on the board to embarrass me. I just solved it." "Yeah, well, maybe you should have thought about how that would affect the rest of us before you decided to show off." A teacher finally intervened, breaking up the confrontation, but the damage was done. Marcus spent the rest of lunch feeling isolated, caught between his teacher's resentment and his peers' hostility. It seemed that being smart, being different, was something he was going to be punished for no matter what he did. That night, Marcus sat in his father's old study, a small converted closet where James Williams had kept his books and papers. Angela had preserved it exactly as it was, unable to bring herself to pack away her husband's things. Marcus often came here when he needed to feel close to his father. He pulled out one of his father's old textbooks on advanced calculus and started working through problems, not for school, but for himself. The familiar scratch of pencil on paper, the logical progression from problem to solution, calmed his anxious mind. "Dad," he whispered into the quiet room, "I wish you were here. You'd know what to do. You'd know how to make them understand." He worked late into the night, reviewing techniques and methods he'd learned years ago. If he was going to have to prove himself tomorrow, he wanted to be ready. He wanted to show them, all of them, that he was exactly who he said he was. Angela checked on him around midnight and found him still working by the small desk lamp. "Baby, you need to sleep," she said gently. "I know. Just a few more problems." She sat down on the edge of the old armchair in the corner. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. No matter what happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. Your father would be proud of you. Not because you're smart, but because you're brave. It takes courage to be different, to stand out. And it takes even more courage to keep going when people try to tear you down." Marcus looked at his mother, really looked at her. She was exhausted, working herself to the bone to provide for them. She had dark circles under her eyes and new strands of gray in her hair. But her eyes were fierce with love and determination. "I'm scared, Mom," he admitted quietly. "What if I freeze up tomorrow? What if I can't do it under pressure?" "Then we deal with that together," Angela said. "But Marcus, I've seen you work. I've watched you solve problems that made your father proud. You can do this. You just have to trust yourself." Friday morning arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather, but Marcus felt cold as he walked into Jefferson Middle School. His mother had taken the entire day off from both jobs, a financial sacrifice that weighed heavily on Marcus's mind. She walked beside him, dressed in her best outfit, a simple navy dress she usually reserved for church. Principal Morrison met them in the main office, along with Dr. Patricia Chen. Dr. Chen was a petite woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She shook Angela's hand warmly and then turned to Marcus. "Marcus Williams," she said with a slight smile. "Your father was a colleague of mine. He spoke about you often, about how you'd work on problems together. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Something about Dr. Chen's kind tone, her connection to his father, made his throat tight with emotion. They were led to a small conference room that had been set up for the assessment. A whiteboard covered one wall, and a desk with paper and pencils sat in the center. Mr. Henderson was already there, standing stiffly in the corner. He barely acknowledged Marcus's arrival. "The format is simple," Dr. Chen explained. "I've prepared a series of problems at increasing difficulty levels. We'll start with advanced high school mathematics and progress to undergraduate and graduate level material. Marcus will solve them on the board, explaining his process as he goes. The goal isn't to trick you," she said, addressing Marcus directly, "but to accurately assess your mathematical abilities." "Will I get my journal back?" Marcus asked, his voice small. Dr. Chen glanced at Principal Morrison, who nodded. "If you demonstrate the level of understanding that journal suggests, yes, it will be returned immediately." "When can we begin?" Angela asked. She'd positioned herself in a chair against the wall, arms crossed, looking every bit like a mother bear protecting her cub. "Right now," Dr. Chen said. She walked to the whiteboard and wrote the first problem, a calculus optimization problem involving related rates. For most high school students, this would be challenging. Marcus solved it in under 3 minutes, explaining each derivative and constraint clearly. Dr. Chen nodded and wrote the second problem, a more complex integration involving trigonometric substitution. Marcus worked through it methodically, his confidence growing with each step. He could feel Mr. Henderson's eyes on him, but he refused to look at his teacher. The problems continued, each one more difficult than the last. Linear algebra. Multivariable calculus. Differential equations. With each problem, Marcus felt himself slipping into the comfortable rhythm of mathematical thinking, the same rhythm he'd found with his father years ago. Dr. Chen watched him work with growing amazement. She'd expected competence, maybe even talent, but what she was witnessing was something more, genuine mathematical maturity, an intuitive grasp of abstract concepts that usually took years of formal study to develop. After 45 minutes, Dr. Chen wrote a problem on the board that made Mr. Henderson straighten up. It was a complex partial differential equation, similar in difficulty to the one Henderson had used to try to humiliate Marcus. Marcus studied it for a moment, then began working. His chalk moved across the board with confidence, setting up the separation of variables, applying boundary conditions, working through the Fourier series expansion. When he finished, he'd produced a complete, elegant solution. Dr. Chen checked his work carefully, then turned to Principal Morrison and Mr. Henderson. "This is remarkable. Marcus isn't just solving problems, he's demonstrating a deep conceptual understanding of advanced mathematics. The kind of understanding that typically requires years of university-level study." Mr. Henderson's face had gone red. "Anyone can memorize solutions." "He's not memorizing, Mr. Henderson," Dr. Chen interrupted firmly. "I've been teaching mathematics for 30 years. I know the difference between memorization and understanding. Marcus is reasoning through these problems in real time, adapting to variations I've introduced specifically to test whether he truly grasps the concepts." She wrote one final problem on the board, a graduate-level topology problem that she'd pulled from her current research. "Marcus, this is beyond anything you'd find in a standard textbook. Can you work through it?" Marcus studied the problem. Topology was one area he hadn't explored as deeply, but his father had introduced him to the basics before he died. He could see the structure of the problem, the way it connected to concepts he did understand. "I'm not sure I can solve it completely," he admitted. "But I can set up the approach." He began working, mapping out the problem's structure, identifying the relevant theorems, sketching a solution path even though he couldn't complete every step. When he finished, what he'd produced was incomplete but showed genuine mathematical thinking. Dr. Chen smiled. "That's exactly what I wanted to see. You recognized the limits of your knowledge and worked within them intelligently. That's more valuable than a dozen memorized solutions." She turned to Principal Morrison. "I've seen enough. Marcus has demonstrated exceptional mathematical ability, well beyond his grade level. There's no question that the work in his journal is authentic." Angela stood up, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you, Dr. Chen. No thanks necessary. Your husband would be very proud." Dr. Chen looked at Mr. Henderson pointedly. "I believe you have something to return to Marcus." Mr. Henderson's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then, moving stiffly, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out Marcus's journal. He held it out without making eye contact. Marcus took it carefully, pressing the worn leather cover against his chest. His relief was overwhelming, a physical weight lifting from his shoulders. "I think we're done here," Principal Morrison said, clearly eager to end the uncomfortable situation. "Marcus, you can return to class. Mrs. Williams, thank you for your cooperation in resolving this matter." But Dr. Chen wasn't finished. "Actually, I'd like to discuss Marcus's educational future. It's clear that traditional middle school mathematics is far below his level. Have you considered advanced placement programs? Online university courses?" "We've looked into it," Angela said quietly. "But most programs are expensive, and with my work schedule, it's difficult to coordinate transportation to the university for any in-person components." Dr. Chen frowned thoughtfully. "I may be able to help with that. Let me make some calls." The weekend passed quietly. Marcus spent most of it in his father's study, reunited with his journal, working through problems with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in days. Angela made his favorite meals and tried to put the whole incident behind them. But Monday morning brought unexpected developments. Marcus arrived at school to find students whispering in clusters, their conversation stopping when he walked past. Something was happening, but he couldn't figure out what. In homeroom, Sarah Chen leaned over to his desk. "Have you heard?" she whispered. "Heard what?" "Mr. Henderson isn't here today. And there are people from the district office in Principal Morrison's office." Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "What people?" "I don't know. But my mom serves on the school board, and she said there's an investigation." Before Marcus could ask more questions, the morning announcements began. After the usual notices about lunch menus and after-school activities, Principal Morrison's voice came through the speaker with a special announcement. "Students, please be aware that Mr. Henderson will be absent from class for the remainder of this week. His classes will be covered by substitute teachers. That is all." The classroom erupted in whispers. Teachers didn't usually take week-long absences without warning, especially not in the middle of the semester. Marcus felt uneasy. He'd wanted his journal back, wanted to clear his name, but he hadn't wanted this, whatever this was. Despite everything, he didn't want Mr. Henderson to lose his job. During lunch, Marcus learned more details from the school's gossip network. Apparently, after the assessment on Friday, Dr. Chen had filed a formal complaint with the district about Mr. Henderson's handling of the situation. She described it as educational malpractice and potential discrimination. The phrase, potential discrimination, had triggered an automatic investigation by the district's equity office. They were now reviewing Mr. Henderson's teaching record, interviewing students from his classes, and examining whether there was a pattern of bias in how he treated students. "This is getting out of hand," Marcus said to Sarah during lunch. "I just wanted my journal back." "Maybe," Sarah said carefully, but what if other students have had problems with him too? What if you just brought attention to something that's been happening for a while? Marcus hadn't considered that possibility. He thought back over the past months in Mr. Henderson's class. The teacher had always been strict, demanding, sometimes harsh. But had he been harsher with some students than others? Marcus had mostly kept his head down, not wanting to attract attention, so he hadn't noticed. That afternoon, Marcus was called to Principal Morrison's office. His heart sank as he walked through the hallways, wondering what he'd done now, what new accusation awaited him. But when he entered the office, he found two women in professional suits sitting across from Morrison's desk. They introduced themselves as Ms. Johnson and Ms. Rivera from the district's Office of Equity and Inclusion. "Marcus, thank you for meeting with us," Ms. Johnson said with a warm smile. "We're conducting a review of some incidents that occurred in Mr. Henderson's classroom, and we'd like to hear your perspective. You're not in any trouble, we just want to understand what happened." Over the next hour, Marcus told them everything, answering their careful questions about the equation incident, Mr. Henderson's accusations of plagiarism, the way his journal had been confiscated. The women took notes and asked follow-up questions that showed they understood the seriousness of what had occurred. "Have you experienced similar incidents with Mr. Henderson before this?" Ms. Rivera asked. Marcus thought carefully. "He's always been strict. But I usually keep quiet in class, so I don't get noticed much. This was the first time he really focused on me." "What about other students? Have you noticed him treating any students differently?" Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to get Mr. Henderson in more trouble, but he also couldn't lie. "I've noticed he seems stricter with some students. He calls on them more often to answer questions they probably don't know, like he's trying to catch them not paying attention. A lot of them are." Marcus trailed off, not sure how to say it. "A lot of them are students of color?" Ms. Johnson prompted gently. Marcus nodded slowly. "I never really thought about it before. But yeah, I guess so." After the interview, Marcus left the office feeling confused and guilty. He hadn't wanted to cause problems for Mr. Henderson. He just wanted to learn, to do mathematics, to honor his father's memory. How had it become this complicated? The investigation continued throughout the week. More students were interviewed. Teachers were questioned. Ms. Johnson and Ms. Rivera spent hours reviewing Mr. Henderson's grade distributions, disciplinary referrals, and teaching evaluations going back years. What they found was disturbing. While Mr. Henderson's behavior never crossed into overt racism, there was a clear pattern in how he treated students. Black and Latino students in his classes received more disciplinary referrals than white students with similar behavior. They were called on more often to answer questions, but given less time to respond. Their work was scrutinized more heavily, their mistakes treated as evidence of lack of effort rather than simple errors. The data painted a picture of unconscious bias, or perhaps not so unconscious, that had affected hundreds of students over Henderson's 23-year career. One particularly damning piece of evidence came from a conversation Henderson had been overheard having in the teacher's lounge 3 years earlier. Another teacher reported that Henderson had complained about declining standards and said that the school was making excuses for students who don't value education. The context made it clear he was referring to students from low-income minority families. By Thursday, rumors were flying through the school. Some students supported Henderson, insisting he was just a strict teacher being punished for having high standards. Others shared their own stories of feeling singled out, of being made to feel stupid or less than in his classroom. Marcus tried to stay out of it, but he couldn't escape the whispers. Some students blamed him for starting everything. Others called him a hero. He hated both labels equally. That evening, Angela received a call from Principal Morrison. "Mrs. Williams, I wanted to update you on the situation. The district's investigation has concluded. Based on their findings, Mr. Henderson is being placed on administrative leave pending a formal review. He'll likely be offered the option to retire early with full benefits, or face termination proceedings." Angela was quiet for a long moment. And Marcus? Marcus did nothing wrong. In fact, the investigators were impressed by how carefully he answered their questions, how fair he tried to be even to someone who had treated him unfairly. You've raised a good young man. After she hung up, Angela found Marcus in the study, working on problems as usual. Mom, did I do the right thing? He asked before she could say anything. Mr. Henderson might lose his job because of me. Angela sat down in the old armchair. Baby, Mr. Henderson might lose his job because of his own actions. Because of how he chose to treat his students. You didn't make him take your journal. You didn't make him accuse you of cheating. You didn't make him dismiss your abilities because of where you come from or what you look like. But if I'd just stayed quiet, if you'd stayed quiet, nothing would have changed. And the next brilliant kid who crossed his path would have been treated the same way. Is that what you want? Marcus shook his head slowly. Your father used to say that knowledge brings responsibility. Once you know the truth, you have a responsibility to speak it, even when it's hard. You spoke your truth. The rest is up to the adults to handle. Monday morning, Marcus entered school to find Mr. Henderson's classroom had a new teacher. Ms. Walsh was young, energetic, and nervous as she introduced herself to the confused students filing into class. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ms. Walsh, and I'll be your mathematics teacher for the remainder of the semester. I know this is a sudden change, and I'm here to answer any questions you might have. Jason Martinez raised his hand immediately. Where's Mr. Henderson? Ms. Walsh's smile became strained. Mr. Henderson is no longer teaching at Jefferson Middle School. That's all I can share about personnel matters. Now, let's talk about mathematics. The classroom buzzed with whispered conversations. Marcus slid into his seat, trying to become invisible. He could feel eyes on him, could hear his name in the hushed discussions around him. Ms. Walsh taught that day's lesson on polynomial functions with an enthusiasm that felt foreign after months of Mr. Henderson's rigid instruction. She asked questions differently, gave students time to think, praised effort as much as correct answers. When students got problems wrong, she treated it as a learning opportunity rather than evidence of failure. During lunch, Marcus was surprised when 3 students he barely knew approached his table. Hey, Marcus, said Jamal, a tall 8th grader who'd been in Mr. Henderson's class the previous year. I just wanted to say, thanks, man. Marcus looked up, confused. For what? For standing up to Henderson. That dude made my life hell last year. Failed me on a test because he said my handwriting was unacceptable, even though I got all the answers right. My parents fought with him for weeks about it. A girl named Keisha nodded. He told me I should focus on subjects I'm better suited for when I asked for help with a problem. Made me feel like I was too stupid for math. A third student, Marcus, a Latino boy, added, he used to make comments about my accent, said I needed to speak proper English in his classroom. This was math class. Why did my accent matter? One by one, students came forward with their stories. Not everyone, some students had liked Mr. Henderson, had thrived under his strict teaching style. But many others had experienced the subtle and not so subtle ways he'd made them feel less than, unwelcome, incapable. Marcus listened to it all with growing realization. This hadn't just been about him and his journal. It had been about years of students being made to feel like they didn't belong in a mathematics classroom because of their race, their accent, their neighborhood, their background. I didn't know, Marcus said quietly when they finished. I didn't know it was happening to other people too. That's how it works, Keisha said. You feel like it's just you, like maybe you're being too sensitive. But when everyone starts talking, you realize it's a pattern. That afternoon, Principal Morrison called an assembly for the entire 7th and 8th grade. Students filed into the gymnasium, speculation running wild about what would be announced. Morrison stood at the podium, looking older and more tired than usual. Students, faculty, I want to address the recent events involving Mr. Henderson's departure from our school. I know there's been a lot of talk, a lot of rumors. I want to be as transparent with you as possible while respecting everyone's privacy. He explained, in carefully chosen words, that an investigation had revealed patterns of behavior that didn't meet the district's standards for equitable education. That Mr. Henderson had been given the opportunity to retire with dignity and had accepted. That the district was committed to ensuring all students felt welcome and supported in their classrooms. I also want to address something else, Morrison continued. There's been talk about the student who got Mr. Henderson fired. That's not what happened. One student's courage in speaking up revealed problems that had existed for years. That student did nothing wrong. In fact, that student showed tremendous bravery. Marcus felt every eye in the gymnasium turn toward him. His face burned with embarrassment. We all have a responsibility, Morrison said, to create a school environment where every student can thrive. Where talent is recognized and nurtured, regardless of where it comes from. Where teachers inspire rather than intimidate. We've fallen short of that standard, and we're going to do better. The assembly ended with a speech from the district superintendent about new equity training for all staff, new procedures for reporting concerns, new commitment to excellence for all students. It was the kind of speech adults give when something has gone wrong and they want to reassure everyone they're fixing it. Marcus didn't feel reassured. He felt exhausted. After school, as he walked toward the bus stop, he heard someone calling his name. He turned to see Mr. Henderson standing by the parking lot, looking older than Marcus remembered, his face haggard. Marcus froze. Part of him wanted to run, but his feet wouldn't move. Mr. Henderson approached slowly, keeping distance between them. I'm not supposed to be here, he said. But I needed to say something before I left for good. Marcus didn't respond, just waited. I spent 23 years teaching. 23 years. I thought I was good at it. I thought I was fair. Henderson's voice was bitter. But apparently, I was wrong. Apparently, I was biased in ways I never saw. He looked directly at Marcus for the first time. I'm not going to apologize for having high standards. But I will say this, I underestimated you. Badly. And maybe I underestimated a lot of students over the years. I didn't want you to lose your job, Marcus said quietly. I know. They told me you tried to be fair during the investigation, tried not to exaggerate anything. That's more grace than I showed you. Henderson was quiet for a moment. Your father was Dr. James Williams? Marcus nodded. I met him once, at a school event. Smart man. Passionate about mathematics. Henderson's expression became pained. If I'd known, if I'd bothered to ask about your background instead of making assumptions based on how you looked or where you came from. He trailed off, then shook his head. It doesn't matter now. The damage is done. But for what it's worth, I hope you keep pursuing mathematics. You have a real gift. Henderson walked away, shoulders slumped, leaving Marcus standing alone in the parking lot. Marcus felt a complicated mix of emotions, anger, pity, sadness, relief. All of it tangled together in a way he couldn't sort out. That evening, Dr. Chen called Angela with news. I've been making inquiries about opportunities for Marcus. There's a program at the university for exceptionally gifted young students. They can take courses alongside undergraduates, with full scholarships for qualified candidates. I'd like to nominate Marcus. Angela's eyes widened. The university? But he's only 11. I know it's unusual. But Angela, your son is extraordinary. The kind of mathematical talent he has, it needs proper nurturing. The university program would allow him to continue regular school while taking 1 or 2 advanced mathematics courses. We'd provide transportation, mentorship, everything he needs. Angela looked at Marcus, who'd been listening to the conversation. What do you think, baby? Marcus thought about his father's study, about the problems they'd worked together, about the journal that had caused so much trouble. He thought about the equation on Mr. Henderson's board and the moment he'd realized he could solve it. "I think Dad would want me to do it," he said. 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself walking across the campus of State University, his mother beside him and Dr. Chen leading the way. The buildings were massive compared to his middle school, and students rushed past carrying backpacks and coffee cups, discussing topics Marcus could only partially understand. "Nervous?" Angela asked, squeezing his hand. "A little," Marcus admitted. In truth, he was terrified. He'd agreed to start with one class, Introduction to Real Analysis, an undergraduate course typically taken by junior and senior math majors. Dr. Chen had assured him he was ready, but Marcus worried about being the youngest person in the room, about standing out in ways he'd learned were dangerous. The classroom was in the mathematics building, a relatively old structure with worn floors and walls covered in cork boards displaying research posters and conference announcements. Marcus and Angela arrived 15 minutes early, but several students were already there, chatting with each other or reviewing notes. Professor Harrison, who taught the course, greeted them at the door. He was a man in his 60s with wild white hair and a kind face. "You must be Marcus," he said, shaking the boy's hand. "Patricia, Dr. Chen, has told me all about you. Welcome to Real Analysis. Fair warning, this is one of the more challenging courses in our undergraduate sequence. We'll be doing rigorous mathematical proofs, and I expect all my students to struggle at times. But if you can handle the material, you'll find it's also one of the most rewarding." As more students filed in, Marcus noticed several of them glancing at him curiously. An 11-year-old in a college mathematics classroom was definitely unusual. He slid into a seat in the second row, trying to look smaller than he was. The student next to him, a young woman with her hair in a messy bun, leaned over. "First day?" "Yeah," Marcus said. "Mine too. I'm terrified. Are you a prodigy or something?" Marcus wasn't sure how to answer that. "I just like math." She laughed. "Well, you're in the right place then." The class began, and Marcus felt himself relax as Professor Harrison started discussing the axioms of real numbers. This was familiar territory, concepts his father had taught him years ago. When Harrison asked for volunteers to prove that the square root of 2 was irrational, Marcus hesitantly raised his hand. "Yes, the young man in the second row." Marcus stood and walked to the board, aware of every eye on him. He wrote out the proof, using contradiction, showing that if the square root of 2 were rational, it would lead to the impossible conclusion that an odd number equals an even number. His handwriting was neat, his logic clear. When he finished, Harrison nodded approvingly. "Excellent. That's exactly the kind of rigorous thinking we'll be doing in this course. Thank you, Marcus." As Marcus returned to his seat, the girl next to him whispered, "Okay, definitely a prodigy." Over the next several weeks, Marcus settled into a new routine. He'd attend his regular middle school classes in the morning, then his mother or Dr. Chen would drive him to the university for his afternoon real analysis class. The coursework was challenging, demanding a different kind of thinking than he was used to. But he loved it, the precision of mathematical proofs, the way seemingly simple statements required pages of careful argument to demonstrate. His classmates, initially skeptical of the young kid in their midst, gradually accepted him as he proved he belonged there. They started including him in study groups, asking for his perspectives on problems, treating him not as a curiosity but as a peer. Back at Jefferson Middle School, things had changed too. Ms. Walsh had transformed the mathematics classroom into a place of exploration rather than intimidation. Students who'd been afraid to ask questions in Henderson's class now participated actively. The class atmosphere was lighter, more collaborative. But not everyone was happy with the changes. Jason Martinez, who'd confronted Marcus in the cafeteria weeks ago, had become increasingly hostile. One day after school, he cornered Marcus by the lockers. "Think you're special, don't you?" Jason said, his voice low and angry. "Going to the university, acting like you're better than everyone here." "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Marcus said quietly, looking for an escape route. Yeah, right. You got Henderson fired, and now you're too good for regular school. Know what that makes you? Before Jason could finish, Sarah Chin appeared. Leave him alone, Jason. This doesn't concern you. It does when you're bullying my friend. Sarah stepped between them. Marcus didn't ask for any of this. He just wanted to learn. Maybe if you spent more time studying and less time being angry at people for being smart, you'd understand that. Jason looked like he wanted to argue, but other students were gathering, watching the confrontation. He backed off with a final glare at Marcus. Whatever. Enjoy your fancy university classes, genius. After he left, Sarah turned to Marcus. You okay? Yeah. Thanks. Marcus adjusted his backpack. Why do people care so much about what I'm doing? It doesn't affect them. Because it makes them uncomfortable. You're different, and different scares people. Especially when it makes them question whether they could do more, be more. Sarah smiled. Don't let it get to you. What you're doing is amazing. That evening, Marcus sat in his father's study, working through a particularly difficult proof for his university class. It involved constructing a specific type of sequence with certain convergence properties, and he'd been stuck for hours. Angela knocked on the door frame. How's it going? I can't figure this out, Marcus admitted, frustration in his voice. I feel like I should be able to see the solution, but I'm missing something. Angela sat down in the old armchair. Your father used to say that the problems worth solving are the ones that make you struggle. If everything came easily, you wouldn't be learning. But what if I can't do it? What if Dr. Chen was wrong about me being ready for this? Then you'll ask for help. You'll work harder. You'll figure it out eventually. Angela looked at her son with pride and concern mixed together. Marcus, I need you to understand something. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. Not to Mr. Henderson, not to your classmates, not even to your father's memory. The only person you need to satisfy is yourself. Marcus considered this. He'd been carrying so much weight, the pressure to honor his father's legacy, to prove Mr. Henderson wrong, to justify Dr. Chen's faith in him. When had learning mathematics, the thing he loved most, become such a burden? What if I just want to do math because I enjoy it? He asked quietly. Then that's the best reason of all. Angela smiled. Now, want some help talking through that problem? I may not understand the math, but sometimes explaining it to someone else helps you see it differently. Marcus began explaining the problem, and as he talked through his approach, he suddenly saw what he'd been missing. The solution wasn't about constructing the sequence directly, but about proving such a sequence must exist using properties of complete spaces. That's it, he exclaimed, grabbing his pencil. Mom, you're a genius. Angela laughed. I have no idea what you just said, but I'm glad I could help. Marcus worked late into the night, finally completing the proof. When he showed it to Professor Harrison the next day, the professor spent several minutes reviewing it carefully. This is good work, Marcus, Harrison said finally. Very good. You took a creative approach that I haven't seen students use before. Have you considered pursuing mathematics seriously? Research, academia? I'm only 11, Marcus said. I know. But talent like yours, it's rare. I want you to start thinking about your future, about what you want to do with these gifts you have. News of Marcus's university enrollment spread beyond Jefferson Middle School. A local newspaper reporter heard about the story, the young black student who'd been accused of plagiarism, only to prove himself capable of university-level mathematics. They wanted to do a feature article. Angela was hesitant. We've had enough attention already. Can't we just let Marcus focus on his studies? But Dr. Chen saw it differently. Stories like Marcus's matter. They show young students, especially students of color, that they can excel in STEM fields. That bias and low expectations can be overcome. I think it could inspire others. After much discussion, Marcus and Angela agreed to a single interview. The reporter, Maria Santos, met them at their small apartment on a Saturday morning. She was a young Latina woman with a warm smile and an easy manner that put Marcus at ease. "I'm not here to make you uncomfortable," Maria said as she set up her recorder. "I just want to tell your story accurately. The challenges you faced, how you overcame them, and where you're going from here." Over the next hour, Marcus talked about his father, about their evenings working on problems together. About how mathematics had been his way of staying connected to his dad after he died. About the incident with Mr. Henderson and the equation on the board. "Were you scared?" Maria asked. "When he put that equation up, trying to embarrass you?" "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "But also, I knew I could solve it. My dad had taught me how to approach problems like that. And I thought if I solved it, maybe Mr. Henderson would see that I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I just wanted to learn." "Do you think what happened to Mr. Henderson was fair?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I think he made choices that hurt a lot of students over many years. Not just me. And when you hurt people, even if you don't mean to, there are consequences. Is that fair? I don't know. But it's real." The article ran 2 weeks later under the headline, "Young Genius Overcomes Bias to Pursue His Dreams." It included photos of Marcus at the university, at his middle school, and sitting in his father's study surrounded by books. The story went viral, shared thousands of times on social media. Suddenly, Marcus was receiving messages from people across the country. Parents of gifted students thanked him for speaking out. Teachers reached out to share their own efforts to recognize and nurture talent in unexpected places. Students told him they'd been inspired to pursue mathematics despite facing similar discouragement. But there was also backlash. Some commenters insisted the story was exaggerated, that no 11-year-old could really do university mathematics. Others claimed Marcus was being used as a token, that the university was only helping him to improve their diversity statistics. A few sent hateful messages that Angela quickly blocked before Marcus could see them. "Is this what happens when you stand out?" Marcus asked his mother one evening, looking at some of the negative comments. "People try to tear you down." "Some people do," Angela agreed. "But look at all the positive messages too. Look at the kids who say you inspired them. That matters more." One of those positive messages came from an unexpected source. Dr. Catherine Moore, the district superintendent, requested a meeting with Marcus and Angela. They met in her office on a Tuesday afternoon. Dr. Moore was an African-American woman in her 50s with a commanding presence and intelligent eyes that reminded Marcus of Dr. Chen. "Marcus, Mrs. Williams, thank you for meeting with me," she began. "I've been following your story closely, and I believe it's highlighted some important gaps in how our district identifies and serves gifted students, particularly students of color." She explained that the district was launching a new initiative to identify mathematically talented students earlier and provide them with appropriate challenges and resources. They were also implementing mandatory bias training for all teachers and new procedures for reporting concerns about discrimination. "But I don't want this to be just policies on paper," Dr. Moore said. "I want to create real change. Marcus, I'd like to invite you to be part of an advisory committee we're forming, students, parents, and teachers working together to ensure we don't miss talented students the way we almost missed you." "Me?" Marcus was surprised. "I'm just a kid." "You're a kid who experienced firsthand what happens when the system fails. Your perspective is invaluable." Dr. Moore smiled. "Plus, I suspect you have insights about how to make mathematics more accessible and engaging for students. Am I right?" Marcus thought about his father's teaching methods, about how he'd made mathematics feel like an adventure rather than a chore. About Professor Harrison's encouraging approach at the university, so different from Mr. Henderson's rigid demands. "I might have some ideas," he admitted. Over the next several months, Marcus attended monthly meetings with the advisory committee. They discussed curriculum changes, teacher training, outreach programs to underserved communities. Marcus was usually the youngest person in the room, but the adults listened to his suggestions seriously. He proposed starting a mathematics club at Jefferson Middle School, a place where students who loved math could explore problems beyond the standard curriculum. Ms. Walsh enthusiastically agreed to sponsor it. The first meeting drew 15 students, including Sarah Chen and, surprisingly, Jamal, the 8th grader who'd thanked Marcus after Henderson's departure. "I always thought I was bad at math," Jamal explained. "Henderson convinced me I couldn't do it. But watching you, I realized maybe I just never had a teacher who believed in me. I want to try again." The club became a place where students could struggle with difficult problems without fear of judgment, where mistakes were treated as learning opportunities, where everyone supported each other. Marcus found that teaching others actually deepened his own understanding. One afternoon, as club members worked on a particularly challenging geometry problem, Principal Morrison stopped by to observe. Afterward, he pulled Marcus aside. "This is exactly what we needed," Morrison said. "A space where students can discover their love of mathematics organically. You've created something special here." "It's what my dad used to do with me," Marcus said. "I'm just sharing it with others." "Your father would be proud of you. Not just for your mathematical abilities, but for how you're using them to help others." Morrison paused. "I owe you an apology, Marcus. When you first came to me about Mr. Henderson, I should have listened more carefully. I should have investigated immediately instead of making you prove yourself." "You were trying to be fair to everyone," Marcus said. "No, I was trying to avoid conflict. There's a difference." Morrison looked at the students still working on their problem, heads bent together in concentration. "I won't make that mistake again." Back at the university, Marcus continued to excel in his real analysis course. Professor Harrison started giving him additional reading, papers from mathematical journals that explored advanced topics. Marcus would work through them slowly, asking questions when he got stuck, gradually expanding his understanding. One day, Harrison called Marcus to his office after class. "I've been thinking about your future, Marcus. Have you considered entering any mathematics competitions? The USA Mathematical Olympiad, for instance." "I've heard of it," Marcus said. "But isn't that for high school students?" "Typically, yes. But there's no age restriction. And I think you have a real shot at qualifying. More importantly, it would connect you with other young people who love mathematics as much as you do. You'd have peers, Marcus. People your own age who understand you." The idea intrigued Marcus. He'd always been isolated, the kid who was different. What would it be like to be around others like him? "How would I prepare?" he asked. Harrison smiled. "I'll help you. And I know several graduate students who'd be happy to work with you too. Let's start preparing for the qualification round." 6 months after the incident with Mr. Henderson, Marcus stood on the stage of Jefferson Middle School's auditorium, looking out at an audience of students, parents, teachers, and community members. He wore his best clothes, dress pants and a button-up shirt that his mother had ironed carefully that morning. In his hands, he held a plaque recognizing him as the District Student of the Year. "I'm not really good at speeches," Marcus began, his voice slightly shaky. "But I wanted to say thank you to everyone who supported me this year. My mom, who worked so hard to give me opportunities. Dr. Chen, who believed in me and helped me find my place at the university. Ms. Walsh, who made our classroom a place where everyone can learn. And my friends, who stood by me even when things got complicated." He paused, looking down at the plaque. His reflection stared back at him, distorted in the shiny surface. "This year was hard. I faced a teacher who didn't believe in me, who tried to embarrass me in front of my classmates. And for a while, I wished I'd just stayed quiet, just accepted it, just kept my head down like I always had. But my mom told me something important, that once you know the truth, you have a responsibility to speak it." Marcus looked up, finding his mother in the audience. She was crying, quietly, her hand pressed to her mouth. The truth is that every student deserves a chance to show what they can do. Deserves teachers who believe in them. Deserves to be judged by their abilities, not their background or the color of their skin. What happened to me shouldn't have happened. But it did. And the only way to make sure it doesn't happen to others is to speak up when we see injustice, even when it's scary. He saw Sarah Chen in the audience, grinning proudly. Jamal and the other members of the mathematics club, sitting together. Professor Harrison, who'd taken time from his university schedule to attend. Dr. Moore, the superintendent, nodding approvingly. I'm not special, Marcus continued. I'm just a kid who loves mathematics, who had a dad who taught me to see beauty in numbers and logic. But I was lucky. Lucky to have people who fought for me. Lucky that my voice was eventually heard. Not every student has that luck. So this award. I accept it not just for me, but for all the students whose talents go unrecognized. Whose voices go unheard. Who are told they can't, when they absolutely can. The applause was thunderous. Marcus felt tears in his own eyes now, overwhelmed by the response. He stepped off the stage and was immediately enveloped in his mother's arms. Your father is watching, baby, Angela whispered. And he is so proud. The ceremony ended with a reception in the cafeteria. Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers, including several teachers from other schools in the district who wanted to hear about the mathematics club he'd started. But the moment that meant the most came when Jamal approached him, holding a piece of paper. Hey, Marcus, I wanted to show you something. Jamal unfolded the paper to reveal a complex algebra problem with his solution written out in careful steps. I got accepted into the advanced math class for next year. Because of the club, because you showed me I could do this. Marcus looked at the solution. It was correct, showing genuine mathematical understanding. This is great, Jamal. Really great. I never thought I could be good at math. Henderson convinced me I was stupid. But you showed me that was wrong. So, thank you. As the evening wound down, Marcus stood outside the school waiting for his mother to finish talking with Dr. Chen. He looked up at the building where so much had happened this year, the classroom where he'd been humiliated, the principal's office where he'd fought to clear his name, the conference room where he'd proven himself. A car pulled into the parking lot, and Marcus was surprised to see Mr. Henderson step out. The former teacher looked older, more tired. He saw Marcus and hesitated, as if considering whether to approach. Finally, he walked over slowly. Marcus. I wasn't going to come tonight, but I heard about the award. I wanted to. I don't know. See for myself, I guess. Marcus didn't know what to say. He felt no particular anger toward Henderson anymore, just a kind of sad understanding of how fear and bias could make people cruel. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Henderson continued. About my career, about the students I taught. About you. He pulled a worn notebook from his jacket pocket. I found this when I was cleaning out my old classroom materials. It's yours, from early in the semester. You must have left it behind one day. Marcus took the notebook. It was one of his older ones, filled with problems from the previous year. He'd thought he'd lost it. I read through it, Henderson admitted. Really read it this time, without my assumptions getting in the way. And I realized what an incredible mind you have. What an incredible mind you've always had. He paused. I'm sorry, Marcus. For not seeing it sooner. For trying to dim your light instead of helping it shine. I don't know what to say, Marcus admitted. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that I've learned something from all this. That I was wrong. Not just about you, but about a lot of things. Henderson looked up at the school building. I spent 23 years teaching, and I thought I was doing good work. Turns out I was hurting students I didn't even realize I was hurting. That's going to haunt me for a long time. Angela emerged from the school and tensed when she saw Henderson. But Marcus gave her a small nod. It was okay. I should go, Henderson said. But Marcus, keep pursuing mathematics. You have a gift that shouldn't be wasted. And maybe, someday, use that gift to make sure other kids don't face what you faced. Make the system better than I did. He walked back to his car and drove away, leaving Marcus holding the old notebook. Are you okay? Angela asked, putting her arm around her son. Yeah, I think I am. Marcus looked at the notebook, then up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Dad used to say that mathematics is about finding truth in a world of uncertainty. About proving what's real, even when it's hard to see. That sounds like something James would say. I think I understand it better now. It's not just about equations and proofs. It's about standing up for what's true, even when people don't want to see it. Even when it costs you something. They stood together in the parking lot, mother and son, as the last light faded from the sky. Inside the school, Marcus could hear the sounds of the reception winding down, of people laughing and celebrating. His plaque was already packed safely in his mother's car, something to put on the wall in his father's study. But the real prize wasn't the plaque or the recognition. It was the knowledge that he'd found his voice, that he'd stood up for himself and, in doing so, had helped others find their voices too. It was the mathematics club he'd started, the students like Jamal who now believed in themselves. It was the changes happening in the district, slowly but surely, to make sure talented students weren't overlooked because of where they came from or what they looked like. Marcus thought about the equation Mr. Henderson had put on the board that day, intending it as a joke, as punishment. But that equation had become something else entirely. It had become the catalyst for change, the moment when Marcus stopped hiding his light and let it shine. And in the end, that was the most beautiful proof of all. Dear friend, Marcus's story reminds us that genius has no color, no zip code, no right background. Every day, talented young people face teachers, bosses, or systems that underestimate them based on prejudice rather than potential. But here's the truth that can change everything. One voice speaking up can create ripples that transform entire communities. When we see injustice, in classrooms, workplaces, or anywhere, we have two choices: stay silent or speak truth. Marcus chose truth. Not because he wanted attention or revenge, but because he knew others would face the same barriers if nothing changed. Your voice matters. Whether you're a student fighting for recognition, a parent advocating for your child, or simply someone who believes in fairness, speak up. Document the truth. Stand firm. And remember, the very traits that make people underestimate you might be your greatest strengths. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of courage, justice, and triumph. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. Together, we can ensure every talented person gets the chance to shine. Remember, you are capable of more than anyone's low expectations. Prove them wrong, not for revenge, but to light the way for those who come after you.